Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
The hidden habits that are quietly hurting your relationship and how to change them. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to grow through life's hardest experiences, while others stay stuck repeating the same painful patterns? Most of us want healthier relationships, greater peace, and a stronger sense of purpose. But wanting change and creating change are two very different things. The truth is that transformation rarely begins with learning one more communication skill. It begins with the courage to be more honest with ourselves. So many of our struggles begin with the gap between what we hoped life would be and what life actually is. We imagine our partner should understand us without asking, that recovery should happen quickly, that healing should be linear, or that love should somehow be effortless. But relationships are not built on wishful thinking. They're built on accepting reality and learning how to respond to it with courage and wisdom. Today's conversation explores what it means to move beyond simply understanding ourselves and into actually changing. We'll talk about the stages of change, why reality acceptance is one of the most important freeing skills we can develop, and how discovering your authentic self brings more joy, energy, and meaning to everyday life. We'll also tackle some of the hardest relationship challenges people face: trust after betrayal, healing from infidelity, addiction recovery, relapse, people-pleasing, resentment, and shame. These are painful topics, but they'll also where some of the greatest opportunities for growth can be found. Whether you're struggling in your own relationship, supporting someone you love, or simply trying to become a healthier version of yourself, I think you'll hear something today that will challenge you, encourage you, and perhaps even change the way you see yourself. So settle in for a thoughtful conversation about vulnerability, healing, courage, and what it really takes to create relationships that don't just survive life's hardships, but grow stronger because of them. Today's guests, who are talented brothers in both being therapists, Tyler Patrick, LMFT, and Brannon Patrick, LCSW. In the world of addiction, recovery, compulsive sexual behavior, and betrayal trauma healing. That's their expertise. They co-host the painfully honest but deeply empathic podcast, The Therapy Brothers, over 2 million streams. They specialize in helping couples navigate the complexities of broken trust and building highly connected relationships, all while being engaged in an even deeper spiritual wrestle. I want to begin with a quote from your website. Quote, "True strength comes from being vulnerable and honest about your struggles. It's through this openness that real connection and healing can begin." This is something I 100% agree with, and would you share with my audience why this is true? I love that you use that quote in the beginning.
Well, it's just, if you want connection, then how can you have it any other way than being than actually like putting yourself out there? I mean, it's that simple, right? So connection requires honesty and vulnerability, and sometimes that takes some courage. So that's what we're trying to lead people toward, is connection to God, self, and others, and it requires vulnerability.
Do you want to add, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm happy to add to it. First, I just want to say thank you for the amazing introduction. It makes me feel, you just made my day. So, yeah. No, I would just say and these are things that are hard fought in the trenches, not just from a professional place, but from a very personal place. That I found that the places where I've gone to the depths of the most vulnerability with the right people are the places where I find the deepest level of connection, the deepest level of satisfaction, and the deepest levels of power and purpose in my life. And it's a weird contradiction because most of us are queued up to be afraid of that vulnerability. That's why we call it vulnerability. And yet it's the doorway, when it's met with the right receiving on the other side, to all of the things that every one of us in our lives actually really want.
And it never stops. My husband and I have been married 53, 54 years, I can't remember. But he just found out he only has 16% hearing, and I've been asking him to figure this out better for a while. We won't go into that part. But I had a conversation with him last night about connection. And I explained it was my life's work and that he has adapted and coped with not hearing. He has great hearing aids. It's not really that helpful. And he's learned to float. And floating, and I said, you don't even realize, at holidays, I send the kids into the kitchen and I say, oh, tell your dad that story. I don't want him to miss out. And I said, you don't realize how much you're floating. You've started to do it in an extreme. It's a coping mechanism, but you have to be choiceful about it. And connection is so important. And it was a hard conversation, because he enjoys floating, and but I think he really heard me, because I talked about that's what I'm worried about for him, is that not being able to, and he connects with me because we can face each other and look at each other and have these conversations, but I'm concerned about the larger world.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, because I really like this example, when you say he's learned to float, could you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to share this. I do attribute it to men more often. I always say that I think one of male coping, and I hope I'm not stereotyping, and it's not from personal experience, it's also from professional experience, but being oblivious. In my last therapy session in Cleveland with a Gestalt therapist many years ago, I said, I'm really upset about my husband's level of obliviousness. And this is before the hearing issue. And she said, okay, in the true Gestalt fashion, what's good about obliviousness? And as the dutiful therapist, I said, I know it's a raincoat. You let some of the crap, roll off, and it's really good. I get it. But oh my goodness, it's a level that I think many people use to not have to deal with painful things. He happens to be Jewish. He's never seen Schindler's List. I think that's a fine choice. I have no problem with it, but it's a choice. And I think a lot of times men choose oblivious. I'm not saying women don't, mind you. Choose oblivious because that floating is more comfortable. And I think you guys know, or would agree with me, that being uncomfortable is where real change comes from.
I'd certainly agree with you from a very personal place. And I also would say that the work that Brandon and I do with the men that we work with, we run into that very same thing. And a lot of times they're doing it unconsciously. They've had like their life kind of kick them around a little bit. They've failed at some work, or they're struggling in a relationship, or they don't know how to show their emotions. And so they slowly just kind of filter themselves to the side of the main current of life, and they just float there in that back eddy of the waters of life. And they get by. They do enough. They live their cubicalized life. They feel safe. They don't get beat up too much. But there's something deep inside of them also that no matter how much they try to numb it out or bury it, it keeps coming to the surface saying there's more. Like, get engaged. And a lot of them end up just kind of being too comfortable for too long until something comes along and sort of motivates them to look again, like a wife who says, hey, like, your kids are kind of faltering without your connection, and you're floating, and oh, maybe I am. Or maybe there's a crisis that happens and they're like, oh wow, my wife is now telling me she's leaving me, and I didn't even know there was a problem. And so they kind of get that awakening. And then if they get back into the mainstream, it's painful again.
And that surprise of obliviousness that the wife could actually be leaving is something I've encountered in the office many, 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 many times.
I had a couple session yesterday, and we were talking like they've gotten in some really good, well, I shouldn't say good, in some ruts of like they've developed like perfect disconnection to be comfortable and safe, just at the cost of not having deep real intimacy, and so they both kind of carry this level of resentment toward each other, but they're hedging against risk because neither one of them wants to get hurt, and so they stay disconnected just enough. And I was an analogy I gave I said, look, and this is a true analogy, I have shoulder pain, and that shoulder pain is kind of dull and just like it's just always there, but it's not bad enough that I need to go get surgery. So I live with it. I just have it. I just like it's just like, but it sucks. Like it's not, and just how many relationships are that way where we float. I really like that word. We float in our safe spaces, and then we just don't really get what we want from our relationship, but at least we're safe. That's not a great way to live.
It's one of my clients who was in her late 70s said to me, "Do not ever get a recliner." And I said, "Okay, I already have one, but sure." And she said, "My sister's just so comfortable in that recliner, and there's no movement, and she is aging so badly." And I think in Gestalt we talk about if you want to change, you do keep one foot in the familiar, as Sonia Nevis, my favorite therapist, would say, but you have to have one foot in the unfamiliar. And when somebody would tell me they were confused, I would say, "That's great. I just had a client text me that I don't see anymore because he's not in insurance." And he said, "I'm really confused about what they're talking about in IOP." And I texted back and said, "That's great. Confusion is the beginning of change."
Yeah. I saw this documentary, and I'm really thinking about your husband and his hearing. I want to come back to that because it's interesting to me. This documentary was about people that live a long, long time and are really healthy. And there's this place in Japan where they live like to 110, but it's on a mountain, and they have to climb stairs like all the time. So they're always like dealing with the pain of climbing up and down this mountain, and it's like your husband's hearing. It's almost I like what Tyler said earlier, the unconsciousness of
Yes.
it. It's almost convenient. It's like, well, I only have to hear so much, so I can raincoat this. And he's gonna have to decide to go climb mountains. He's gonna have to decide to say, you know what, I'm going to go listen. I'm going to go hear. I want to know what's going on, because he naturally doesn't have to.
Yep.
Like his ears shut off, right? And I think that's true for all of us in our relationships. We have to decide to go do hard things in order to have healthier relationships.
I completely agree. I think it's encouraging people to do those hard things. I just read something yesterday it was on Instagram, and it said that this guy said he'd been to couples therapy, nothing helped, but he went to some monk place and he spent days silent, and that really helped a lot, and he was so excited to go home. And I thought, well, but I wonder if your therapists were doing enough to help you put that foot into the uncomfortable work, the uncomfortable place. And that is, to me, not just science, but also an art form. And it's difficult,
100%.
So you have courses on your website that people can buy at a really reasonable cost. I think my favorite was reality acceptance. And I used I used index cards, and I would draw pictures and write things for people to take home because you want them to extend the therapy experience. So I used to draw this 60-degree angle. And on the top, I would write expectations, and on the bottom, I would write reality. And then in the middle, I would write gap. I think so much of life struggles begins with this gap between illusions or false expectations and reality. reality. Would you share some of the skills about accepting difficult realities, which is my husband climbing that mountain and making those difficult choices?
This is great. We in the curriculum that we do with a lot of our clients, we have something called the Threshold Challenge. And the Threshold Challenge is where they select something in their life that is actually difficult or uncomfortable, but that they constantly kind of put off. And we invite them for a space or period of time to lean into it every single day. And the one that we give most frequently is the cold plunge challenge, where you go fill your bathtub with a bunch of ice and water, or go find a cold creek and spend 3 minutes up to your head, up to your neck every day. And the whole goal of that assignment is to actually help them learn to regulate their physical body as they step into an uncomfortable place, and learn that they can ease into things that might seem really painful at first, but if you can breathe, if you can regulate, if you can start to calm yourself inside of an uncomfortable situation, you actually learn to trust yourself more. So instead of running from everything that's scary or painful or not real, like you actually learn to accept the reality of the situation and trust yourself to live in that reality. And so we put people through challenges like that sometimes, just to kind of help them experience the principle rather than just learn it in their head.
I think experience, of course, Gestalt is one of the best teachers. That is really cool. I've never heard anybody doing that before. Brandon, did you want to kick in?
Well, I'm thinking a lot about the gap that you're talking about, and the amount of suffering that I've had in my own life and I've seen in my client's life. I think of, let's say that I have an expectation that my wife give me a nice warm hug and a smile every time I walk in the door after work, right? It's like, well, now expectations are premeditated resentments. I've set myself up. And so then I walk in and she doesn't give me that smile and that hug, and then I, instead of dealing with reality, I start to interpret. Well, that means she doesn't love me. That means she's thinking this or that or whatever. And that interpretation of this thing that I'm not even operating in reality is now creating narratives that are contributing to my suffering, right? And if I back way up, and I look at reality, just reality, this is how uncomfortable this is, but real it is. Let me give you an example. I'll come back to the example that I'm giving. We were talking about swearing before we started recording, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to swear. But if I were to say a certain word, all this interpretation would go on. The people listening would think, oh, that word means this, and it means that, and it's bad, and blah, 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 right? What's the reality of me saying a word? The reality of me, just reality acceptance, the reality of it is it's a noise produced by my tongue coming out of me. That's all that is. That's it. It's just a noise. So if I don't interpret it and I don't have to make meaning around it, I can just come back to that's the reality. So let me come back to my example with my wife. I walk in the door. The reality is I walked in the door and she didn't hug me or smile. There's no meaning around that. That's all it is. So if I can just face that reality and accept that reality, I'm not now in a victim stance. I'm not, creating all of this chaos around me because she didn't give me what I wanted. That expectation isn't there. I'm just, that's the reality. Now let's say she doesn't hug me because she's in cooking dinner, and it's like, she's cooking dinner. Now I could look at that and be like, that's a way that she says that she loves me. I'm really grateful for that. I didn't set myself up with this hug thing, and I accepted that I didn't get the hug. She's in there cooking dinner. That's the reality. Awesome. We're in harmony still. But you can see how we can create our own story, which leads to our suffering, which leads to our disconnection. And so we have so much power within us when we can actually face reality.
I've never heard that term premeditated resentments. And I'm always yapping about resentments create the Grand Canyon between people, and how you have to be real and deal with them and talk about them. But premeditated, it sets it all up. You're playing victim, rescuer, persecutor, and you want to be rescued and you feel like a victim, and you're going to be pissy if it doesn't happen. So yeah, that's really a cool way to think about it. On one of your blog posts, I found it really interesting that you talked about finding your real self in order to make life more exciting. I thought that was a neat connection. There's certainly the value of zest for life, and, quote, some people have it and others feel like coasting, unquote, on your website. What are a couple of ways that people can change how they see things and what really matters to achieve more zest?
I'll start, Brandon. Yeah. So this is maybe a broader answer. It's not a specific tool, but a lot of the clients that we work with, they are operating from, let's call it an operating system of their beliefs that tells them everything that they're not. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not nice enough, whatever. And they've learned these things through their life experiences, call it small pieces of trauma or large pieces of trauma that have taught them emotionally that they don't measure up and that they're not enough. And so part of the work that we try to help people do is realize that that is an outward facing avatar that is not actually them. Even though it's felt like it's been them, they feel like that's true. It's actually just a set of exercised beliefs based off of past experiences. And so we help them become conscious of the beliefs first, and then to start to question curiously, does that have to be true? Is it true? Is there something else that could be more true? And, if you've ever watched The Lion King, it's like when Simba he disappears off into the wilderness with Pumbaa and Timon, and he's just kind of partying and coasting for a while because he's avoiding what he thinks is the reality that he murdered his father. Until somebody comes along and kind of smacks him over the head with that stick, Rafiki does, and is like, hey, I know your dad. And then he has this kind of cool, call it an emotional, spiritual experience that reminds him. And what does his dad say in the clouds? Mufasa says, remember who you are. And all of a sudden he starts to get back in touch with the truth of who really are you. Your life experience has actually cultivated you into a recipe that is unique to some kind of purpose, passion, bigger identity, bigger cause. And when people start to uncover that inside themselves again, then it gives them the fire to want to go and write their book or help the next person or engage in the service project that they wanted to do all along, because they're finally doing it from a place of I am rather than a place of I'm not.
I mean, I would say Tyler said that beautifully, and just to simplify it down, it's like, how much of human behavior, I'd love to do a study, I never could pull this off, but is because of fear of abandonment and rejection. So it's like, what color socks I wore today is like, did I put them on because I'm worried that my client might see it and not like it, right? Or, in our relationships, our closest relationships, how much am I constantly hedging out of fear because I'm afraid that I won't be accepted? And to Tyler's point, when you understand the I am, when you know who you are, you don't act from a place of fear. You act from a place of love. You step into your power and you create with that. You're not afraid of rejection. And as you do that, you feel in alignment with yourself, with who you are, with your integrity, and you experience freedom and peace. And also, by the way, you're available for deep connection now. So it really is dealing with the trauma, which has led to a lot of the shame, which has led to a lot of the faking it and hedging against rejection. And instead, knowing who you are, stepping in with courage and love, and creating from a place of power. That's the whole process.
And trying to do the right thing, trying to be a good person in a world that seems to have less expectations of that. You know, that's when, if you can step into your power and feel something about, and I'm probably colored because just finished watching Paradise, which is by the guys who did This Is Us, and I'm a real sucker for character dramas. But Sherwood Brown, I think, is the name of the actor, and he's just so determined to do the right thing in a world that is not, and I just love that. I think that's part of it. In another blog post, you talk about the stages of change. Since change is such a hard thing for all of us, I think it'd be good to understand your ideas about these four stages.
Yeah, it's quite simple. You look at stages of change. The first stage is, you think of all of us that want change in our life. The first stage is kind of stage, I'd say, 0, like it's not happening. So you're in pre-contemplation. You're not even contemplating change. You're in denial. That's the, level 0 stage of change. But then you get consequences in your life. You want something different. Then the next stage is contemplation. I'm contemplating change happening. Which then leads to some preparation. You start making a plan, and then the next is action. You actually start to follow through on that plan, and then the last stage is maintenance, where you're staying steady and consistent with that plan, and so now you're getting different results in your life. So we all get stuck in different parts of that. So like I've been in contemplation to get really healthy physically for the last 30 years. I'm not in pre-contemplation. I know I want change, but it's like, do I really want to exercise? So I'm in contemplation there. We all get kind of stuck. Sometimes we really move. Sometimes change really happens, depending on where you're at in those stages.
And I would just add to that, Brandon, that I've watched you in your last 30 years move from contemplation to preparation to action, back to contemplation and preparation and
That's
action.
True.
And
there's a lot of meandering. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I think, and I just want to normalize that for anybody listening, that when we look at like addiction work, people who are trying to stop an addiction, when I was working for the drug courts of southeastern Idaho, the statistics that we had were that it took 14 concerted efforts before they would actually finally start to carve out real sobriety. And then we look at sobriety and recovery differently, and real recovery. And that seems like overwhelming to somebody who's like, I'm going to have to try 14 times. And it's like, but you learn something new every time, and you're growing and you're changing as you go. And yeah, we do. We bounce back and forth between those places, but that's a normal part of being human.
Yeah, yes, completely agree with that. I think it can be very hard, particularly for people pleasers, to stop playing the one down position. How can they stop doing this to be more authentic and then, of course, less resentful?
Yeah, it's interesting because the people who are often people pleasers, if you get deep underneath in a private room, they harbor a lot of resentment. Mm-hmm. But they just don't want anybody to see it, because then they couldn't be pleasing everybody all of the time. And when you look at a person who's a people pleaser, there's obviously just their personality. They might be more prone to wanting to value relationships, or they're really, but often deep underneath it is a lack of belief in self. And so we allow people to treat us right up to the level that we believe we're worthy of being treated. And so the internal work of the people pleaser is to actually start identifying their own value system, the things that make them tick, start taking care of themselves. And a lot of times we help our people pleasers actually learn to practice the art of saying no. because they don't know how to do that. They think it's a self-betrayal when they do that. They think they're not loving people when they say no. And in reality, that's how they get rid of their own resentments, is because they're no longer crossing their own values to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, I go right along with exactly what Tyler just said. I might say it a bit more bluntly here, and if you are a people pleaser, you might want to fast forward 30 seconds because you might not want to hear this, but the reality is you might be fooling yourself and trying to fool others that you're people pleasing because because of love, because like you're a good person. And in reality, a lot of that people pleasing that you're doing is done because you're trying to extract worth from somebody else. It's a selfish act that you're trying to be good enough. You're trying to be okay. And so one of the first steps, back to your question, is to be honest with yourself about what you're actually doing and realize like that might not be the person you want to be. You don't want to use people. So then that leads to things like Tyler's talking about. You might need to say no. You might need to have somebody be uncomfortable instead of use them for your self-worth. And then you need to go do your own work to figure out where you're going to get that self-worth if you're not going to get it from trying to please others.
Yes. I love the clarity. A lot of clarity. That's really helpful. Sometimes I think we say so many things and the point gets lost. So both of you, I really appreciate that about you. Okay, this is a big topic, healing from infidelity, and I think it's really important for us to spend some time on it. What are practical steps for couples who want to feel in love again when it seems impossible? And I think there's just so many interesting facets to trust and repair. So please do share.
We often get couples coming into our office right after the disclosure has happened or the discovery or something, and so it's pure crisis. And oftentimes when they come in, the first question is, teach us the skills and tools so that we can repair our relationship. And we often try to actually slow them down and help them understand that the process of rebuilding trust, which we can get into in just a second, if that's its own topic maybe, but is actually going to be a longer process than just a couple of skills and tools. And if we try to push them together with those skills and tools without the reestablishment of some firm footing, we're actually doing them a disservice. And so we slow them down and start to say, okay, you're in crisis right now, and trying to make decisions when you're in crisis never allows you to feel confident in that decision. So let's work on getting the trauma that you're experiencing. A betrayed partner is experiencing legitimate trauma. They thought they had a safe place, a secure base, and now that's been ripped out from underneath them, and everything is called into question. And so, of course, they're like spinning. They're confused. They're angry. They're sad. Should they stay? Should they go? Who can they talk to? It's affecting their spirituality. It's affecting everything. And so we try to slow it down and say, let's get you some education. Let's get you some tools for grounding and get you taking care of yourself. Let's build you a team. And once we get those things going, now let's start looking at the actual emotional process that you're in and start moving towards some understanding, some curiosity, some compassion, and then some trauma healing. And for the partner who's done the betraying, the process is actually very similar. Their choices to betray are usually based in choices of not being able to cope emotionally with life, or managing their own shame, or managing their own trauma. And so we get them some education, we get them some structure, we build in some accountability, and then we get them moving towards this idea of understanding self. And once they start doing that, that begins the process of building trust.
Yeah, I mean, everything Tyler said, there are layers deep to each one of those things. So not to overwhelm people, but just to reiterate that people come in a lot of pain, and the relationship is the pain point, but the relationship is not the problem. And so it's important to understand that the process that needs to take place is a lot of it, not all of it, is individual healing, so that you can bring different ingredients into the relationship. And that's what takes some time to do, is to really look deep within. And a lot of times a betrayed partner's like, wait, I didn't cheat. You're telling me I have to do my individual healing? It's not fair, but you have been injured, you've been hurt, and so there's a healing process for you to go through that your partner can't do for you, even though they're the ones that inflicted the wound, the pain here. So both partners have to be willing to go through their own individual healing, and then you start to work on on the relationship. And couples that heal, as they go through this process, they come out of it and they say, wow, like we have a totally new relationship. It's totally different than before this whole thing happened. And it's because the two individuals are different in that relationship. So healing is possible. We can't like explain every little part of it, or we'd be here for hours and hours. but it is a one step at a time process, and the process does work if you're willing to work it. And it's actually, this is why Tyler and I love our job, because we see people in the depths of hell and actually climb out and find some real healing individually, and sometimes, hopefully, sometimes together, right?
I always say that I believe that out of crisis, you do create an infrastructure that's more authentic and more honest and more able to carry the weight of conflict and problems. It creates an atmosphere of greater honesty that I think has been missing often prior to the event.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a trust equation that you have developed, I suspect, out of your expert work in addiction. What are the missing pieces in your relationship? Please say more about this. It feels like a step towards greater reality.
I think you're exactly right. It's the whole equation is a step towards pure integrity. And so if you have the word integrity, and the way that Brandon and I describe integrity is the ability to hold your shape under pressure. So knowing who you are and then being able to stay who you are inside of your relationship is integrity. And we use different elements of that. So the equation itself is, first, before anything else, there needs to, on both partners' sides, there needs to be what we call shame resiliency. They need to both know how to manage their own shame and their own false beliefs so that they're not bringing that in and dumping it onto each other, because that'll unravel a relationship faster than anything else. So if they're both working on their shame resiliency, then the rest of the equation is rigorous honesty plus the skill of empathy plus consistent action over time is what starts to rebuild trust. And then if there's been a breach, you'd add two more ingredients: the partner's grace and forgiveness. And over time, that restores trust and rebuilds relationships in ways that are really magnificent and they're really beautiful.
You think about some of the hiccups. So what Tyler just said, like if you were in a relationship with a person who was rigorously honest, extremely empathetic, and actually followed through and was consistent, that's a trustworthy person, right? But with betrayal, if I'm a betrayed partner, even if you start doing the work and becoming that, I still might be like, yeah, but I've been hurt by you, and I don't want to go get vulnerable with you. And this is one part that's really difficult, is the way that you like that person's doing that work, but the way that you know that you can trust again is you have to go trust. You have to go test it. You have to. So it's really important, this whole process, because a therapist or a guide can help you to know, okay, when are you going to take those steps back into vulnerability with this other person to test it out and trust again, and find out that person is honest, empathetic, and consistent. That person does have integrity. So as you do that, and that person's doing their work, and they used to be a person with no integrity, and now they're showing up consistently as a person with integrity, the rebuild starts to happen. And it's again, a process. And there's usually bumps in the road. Like sometimes the partner who's rebuilding the trust might be doing a really good job, but the other partner is triggered by something and interpreting something that is like, whoa, you're the old person. You're that old person, right? But then when they come back with not defensiveness, but empathy, and hold space for that trigger, wow, now we just went something really difficult, turned into something so beautiful, and another drop in the trust bucket. So that's just kind of a little bit of a flavor of what happens in that whole process.
I like how, because we use the word process all the time, but I like your description of it is a process. It does take time. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and, or take a pill and everything's going to be wonderful, and that's kind of what people want is the easy way. And I just think that most things are take work, for real change. What tips do you have for couples who are struggling in recovery, particularly when someone has relapsed many times?
You want me to go, Tyler?
Yeah, I've been taking the first shot every time. I'll give you one, Brandon.
Well, I want to answer the specific question you asked there at the end, which is when somebody has relapsed many times. Because addiction's real, and it really does destroy relationships in many ways, and especially you take a sexual addiction where it leads to actions like infidelity. How long as a partner do you hang in there and have grace and until like you really do need to have your own boundaries to disconnect from this person? One of the things that we teach is if you're the partner, it's really good for you to educate yourself on what recovery feels like. Not just what it looks like, but what does it actually feel like? And then instead of you being right there in the middle of that recovery for that person, you become an observer. So you sit on the sideline, but you're watching and you're paying attention. And so like if, let's say they go and relapse, if they respond way different after the relapse than they used to, let's say they call their accountability person. They learn new skills, how to cope with the trigger that they had. They strengthen their recovery as a result of that relapse. Then that relapse is a different experience than the relapses of old, right? So you might be able to hang in there and your boundary doesn't have to be divorce yet. But if it happens again and again and again and there's no change, then maybe you do got to get honest with yourself that they are choosing the addiction over your relationship. And that would lead to, it's interesting, sometimes the work that we do leads to divorce. It leads to disconnection because if one partner is getting really healthy and the other isn't, they can't stay together. It won't work. And so moving away from your partner might be a good thing sometimes in your recovery. So you watch it, you observe it, you pay attention, you have your own boundaries, and that's the best thing that you can do.
Brandon's one of his famous quotes on our podcast is, "Healthy boundaries will ruin a bad relationship." And,
I like that.
And I think that that's true. But to get to healthy boundaries, you have to have emotional currency in your own tank because it takes work to hold boundaries, and you have to have confidence in knowing what your values are. And so I would say if there's constant relapse happening, if there's an energy and a growth mindset towards, hey, we're going to change, we're going to grow, we're going to keep adjusting, that's much more hopeful than just continuous relapses that are like, I don't know what happened. I'm still hiding it. You feel it. It's a different feeling. And so take good care of yourself. We do something called the daily charge, which is a set of principles that you commit to as many times as you can per day of just filling your tank emotionally. Build a team so that when you're feeling like you got the wind knocked out of you, you can call somebody who knows what you're going through and speaks your same language and can do two things. They can hold your stuff and they can push you back into the game with your decisions, whatever you choose to do, right? Start practicing mindfulness and curiosity with yourself so that you can meet yourself and the whole situation with greater curiosity and compassion. And if you're doing those things, that'll lead you to what we call the surrender moment, which is this almost like a clear peace in the storm where you're free to make a decision. But it's like a confident decision you're making now instead of an exasperated one.
And one of the things I think about with the non-addicted partner is that they can sometimes very unintentionally feed into increasing the shame of the addicted person because they're so resentful and feel it's so different. So I like your clarity about making distinctions, that it can be small steps that make it different, make the relapse experience different. But if it's the exact same thing every time, then that is something to really talk about and review. So I like that. We've talked about vulnerability, trust, shame, relapse, people-pleasing, and infidelity. They all seem to come back to one thing: accepting reality instead of fighting it. If there's one reality every couple needs to accept in order to build a healthier relationship, what would it be?
I'd say that the one that comes to mind right now is, it's counter to what we were taught growing up, but we think of our relationships in terms of the Disney kind of love, where I'm going to find the perfect person and become Twitter-pated, and then they're going to complete me and make me all the way full. And the relationships that I see that actually have couples really work is when two people look themselves in the mirror over and over again and ask the question, how do I help this go right? And when they take ownership for their part of helping it go right, that makes a pretty awesome relationship.
I mean, Tyler stole the words out of my mouth of understanding that you are whole unto yourself, and this is different than a lot of the things we're taught. You're whole unto yourself first and foremost. You're lovable. You're worthy. You're unconditionally loved, like as yourself. And because of that, then you don't need to consume your partner or use them for your self-worth and okayness. And because of that, because you don't need them and their approval, you can be vulnerable with them, you can be honest, you can be deeply intimate, you can be boundaried, and that's what leads to an actual healthy, differentiated relationship, an interdependent relationship that just creates love. So understanding your own self-worth first is the critical piece to long-term healthy relationships.
So all three of us don't make money doing this. We do it out of a love of people and trying to make life better. And now is the time for you guys to remind people the name of your podcast and anything else you want them to know.
I would just say, if you find yourself in a hard spot in life, mainly because you're listening to a podcast like this, there's always hope. I would just want to speak hope into anybody who's listening right now, that I don't know how it ends for you, but I know that there's a transformational process that you're undergoing right now that ends with you being happier and healthier and better if you allow yourself to work that process. The podcast that we have is called Therapy Brothers. You can look at it either on any of the podcast platforms, or we have a special page set up because of this episode for your listeners. That's therapybrothers.org/what healthy couples know. And so it'll go take you directly there. It'll show Rhoda's name and picture and say, hey, there's the show. And then it'll have a couple of episodes targetedly specifically for you, your listeners. So
if I could add, Tyler and I have been focusing and really dialing in on a specific issue, and that's helping men go from being untrustworthy men to men of integrity who are able to build trust. And we're revamping a comprehensive program and journey. We talk about the process that is specifically tailored for men who are ready to be that type of man. And we have our online groups, our content, and also our in-person retreats that are all geared toward that. So if you go to risingson.org, that's risingson.org, you can get more information about that. And we would love to meet you. We'd love to see you in our program.
Sounds like I should have you guys back to talk about that direction. I think that sounds really cool. As we wrap up today, remember that healthy relationships aren't built by people who never struggle. They're built by people who keep showing up, telling the truth, and trying again. Progress almost always beats perfection, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So this week, be a little gentler with yourself, a little more curious about the people you love, and just brave enough to take one small step toward the relationship you want. Thanks for spending part of your day with us, and until next time, keep choosing connection over perfection. And I appreciate any reviews and likes you can give me. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.